In a previous video, I introduced Notion's formula property and covered the fundamental terms and concepts. If you haven't seen that one, you'll find it linked within the description of this video, along with a detailed text post on Notion VIP. In this video, we're going to put those terms and concepts to work through a few simple and practical examples. And when we do so, we'll be working with two sample databases. The first is a roster of basketball players that comprise a team, and then the second is a collection of online orders. So let's start with our basketball players. In this database, we're given the last name and the first name of each basketball player. So we're going to use a formula to create the full name by merging the first name with the last name and adding a space between them. So we'll start by using our concatenation operator, which is the plus sign. When you apply a plus sign between two text strings, it's going to merge them. So we're going to reference the first name by using the prop function. That function uses the prop keyword, and as its argument, it takes a text string, which is the name of the property that we want to reference. In this case, it's the first name. So we'll reference the first name, add our concatenation operator. We'll add our space, which we want between the first and the last names, another concatenation operator, and then we'll reference the last name. When we confirm, we have our first and last name. Now, to do this, we could also use the concat function, which is the concat keyword, and its arguments is just the series of text strings that you want to concatenate. So again, that'll be the first name, and we're going to use the prop function to reference that again. And then we want to add our space as the second argument. And then the third argument will be our reference to the last name. So there's another way of concatenating or merging these names, the first name and the last name, this time using the concat function. Now we can do it a third way using the join function. The join function will begin with the join keyword, and its first argument is the character that you want to use to separate the subsequent arguments, the subsequent text strings. So we'll start with just our space, then we'll reference our first name, and then our last name. And there is a third way of creating each player's full name, this time using another function, the join function. So let's go over to the age. So this database gives us the player's birthday. It's of the date value type. And we want to use that birthday to determine each player's age. So to do so, we want to find the amount of time between the player's birthday and the current time. So we'll use a formula to do that. So there's a special function for finding the amount of time between two dates, and that's called the date between function. When we write the date between function, we're going to use camel case. Most of Notion's functions, if they contain two words, they'll use camel case, meaning there are no spaces between the words. The first word is all lowercase, and then the subsequent words begin with a capital letter. So the date between function is going to take three arguments. The first two are the dates that we want to find the amount of time between, the first one being the later date, and then the third argument is going to be the unit that we want to use for the returned value. So the first argument here, the later date, is going to use the special now function, which takes no arguments. So that now function is always going to return the current date and time. And the second argument, the earlier date, is going to be a reference to the player's birthday, again using the prop function. And then that third argument for the units, you're going to put the units within quotation marks to make it a text string. In this case, we want it to return that amount of time in years. So we will apply years, close out our parentheses, and confirm. And there we have each player's unique age. So with that player's age determined, we can create a nice labeled age property. So in the previous video, we saw why that's useful. When you view this database as a gallery, by labeling the player's age, it adds context to this number that would otherwise just sit out here alone without any real meaning. And the viewer is going to be inclined to think that it's the player's jersey number when in reality, this number corresponds with the age. So by adding this age label to it, we know exactly what it means. So to add that labeled age property, we're going to combine the term age with a colon and a space. And that's going to be a literal value, meaning we are not referencing another property. We're entering this value, and it's going to be the same for every item in the database when the formula runs its operation. So we have our literal value, the term age, with the colon and the space. And then we want to combine that with a reference to the age property. However, we covered in the previous video the importance of value types. And when you concatenate two values, they have to be text strings. But in this case, the age is a number. So we're going to need to wrap this reference to the age in the format function, which is going to convert that number to a string. When we confirm, we have all of our labeled ages. So if we were to avoid that step of formatting, we can see here that we have a type mismatch, and it's not going to accept this input. You can see that we can't click the done button here. So by applying it within the format function, we're able to create that concatenation. So let's move down to our collection of online orders. It's not critically important to understand this, but just for some context, this database is going to include the order number for each item. And you can see that some of these order numbers are the same. Some orders have multiple line items. And the reason is that there's a different line item for each product SKU. So if a order contains more than one type of product, then it's going to have an independent line for each type of product that the order contains. So you can see here that order number 1 and order number 4, they each have 2 line items, whereas 2, 3, and 5 have independent items, just 1 line item. And the reason that that's important is because we know that if we combine the order number and the product SKU for each line item, that's going to give us an entirely unique value. When you're working with databases, you'll often want to use a unique ID for each line item so that they can be referenced in an entirely unique way. So if we're given the order number, and then we're also given the product SKU, and we want to determine a unique ID for each line item, we can combine them, as I mentioned. And when we do so, we might want to add a character between them for kind of a nice aesthetic and an easy way to distinguish between the order number and the product SKU. So in this case, we'll just add a dash between them. So this is where that join property comes in handy again. We'll use that dash between those two property references. And if we were going to use more than 2 properties to create this unique ID, we could just add that dash as the first argument, and it's going to be applied between every subsequent string within the join function. But right now we're just going to be referencing the order number and the product SKU. So we'll start with our join function, and we want the dash to be our separator. So that'll be our first argument. And then we're going to reference the order number using the prop function. And then we're going to reference the product SKU. So once again, we are faced with a type mismatch, and that's because the order number is a number, and we know that because it's right aligned in its cell here, not only because it's within a number property, but it's right aligned in the cell. If it was left aligned, we would know that it would be a text string. So when we reference that order number, we're once again going to want to use that format property to convert it to a string. And that relieves us of that type mismatch. And when we confirm, we have our IDs. And because Notion doesn't allow us to use formulas to generate the title property value, what I often do is just create a generator property with a formula, and then I can quickly paste it into that title property. And that allows me to use the unique ID as the title for each item. So let's move on to formatting dates. Formatting dates is going to be one of the most useful ways of utilizing Notion formulas. You can display your dates in almost any fashion using the format date function. And that function is going to take two arguments. This is going to take the date as its first argument. So, of course, that's going to need to be of the date value type, which will generally reference another property, a date property. So in this case, we have an order date property to reference. And then the second argument is going to be a pattern that tells Notion how to display your date. So we'll take a look at exactly how you determine how to kind of construct your pattern. But in this case, let's say that we want our date to be a 3-letter abbreviation of the date with a period, and then the 2-letter day with a comma, and then we want it to have an apostrophe with the last 2 numbers of the year. So that's the pattern that we'll use for that. And here we have our error, too many arguments in the format function because I didn't use the correct keyword, which you'll do often. So you'll just want to pay attention to those errors. So now we've made this the format date function, and we'll confirm, and our date is formatted just as intended. So the way to determine how you'll want to construct your patterns in order to display your dates as you want to is you can visit the cheat sheet that we've published to Notion VIP. So if you go to notion.vip/formulas, we took a look at this in the previous video as well, but within the top kind of sub navigation, there's an option for date formats. And if you click on that, you're going to see all of these different patterns that you can apply to your combined patterns in order to construct your date formatting pattern. So you can see that you can format years, quarters, months, weeks, all units of time, as well as AM, PM, time zone offsets, and more. So this is a very helpful resource for beginning to wrap your head around how to construct these patterns to display dates the way that you want to. So this isn't the prettiest display of dates, but you can see how we've applied our pattern to display it as intended. So let's move on here. This database gives us the tax rate of each item as well as the price of each item. And this price is actually calculated based on a number of other properties. But for our sake here, let's just say that the price is given to us and that each item has a different price, but the tax rate is consistently 4%. So we can easily determine the amount of tax to add to each item by multiplying the price by the tax rate. So to do that, we can either use the multiplication operator, which is just the star character, or we can use the multiply function, which is going to take its two arguments, the numbers to be multiplied, and it will return their product. So let's reference the price property, and then let's reference the tax rate property. And when we confirm, we have the amount of tax that we want added. Now, because the tax rate is consistent for all products, we could actually just enter the literal value of 0.04 for that. And sometimes notional act a little funky. But we can, oh, okay. And see here, we have another example of a type mismatch and the importance of paying attention to the value types that you're entering. So of course, that 0.04 no longer needs to be wrapped in quotation marks because we don't want to give it a string. We want to give it the literal value of 0.04, a number. So we can now confirm, and we are going to have the tax to be added to each item produced in a slightly different way using that literal value. So having calculated the tax and given the price, we can then calculate the total price for each item. Of course, all we need to do there is just add the tax to each item. So we'll just do that using the addition operator, which of course is the plus sign. And when placed between two numbers, it's going to return their sum. So we'll just reference the price, and then we'll use that arithmetic operator, the addition operator, and then we'll reference the tax. And another helpful little error here, we added a space after price. Of course, you're going to have to name your properties exactly as they're named within the database. And so you'll just want to pay attention to every character, and you'll encounter those little errors often. And so it's helpful you to see me kind of debug as I go about this. So we'll confirm here, and we have the price of each item. Now, sometimes it will be helpful to track the fulfillment of your orders, and we're going to get into how to do that in a subsequent video after we cover conditional functions, the if function, and how you can perform one series of operations if certain conditions are true, and then another series of operations if that condition is untrue. And you can even nest those conditions to perform a variety of different scenarios. So we are not going to dig into all of that yet, but what I do want to show you is just how we might calculate the number of days since the order. And then these progress and urgency properties are going to factor those days, that number of days since the order, into their own calculations. But for now, we'll just do this first. And once you practice with some of these more introductory functions, you can get into those more complicated ones. So to calculate the days since their order, we're going to use that date between function again, just like we did when we calculated the player's age. So date between is our keyword. And then we want to start with the later date. So once again, that's going to be now, because we want to know how much time was between the date of the order and the current date. And then the second argument is going to be a reference to the order date property. And then remember, the third argument for the date between function is the units that we want to use to display the output. So remember, we used years for the player's age, but this time we want to display the output in days. So that'll be the third argument of this date between. And when we confirm, we can see all of the different durations for each item. So those are some simple and practical examples of the ways that you can use formulas to kind of bolster your databases and your broader Notion workspaces. So practice with those and revisit that first video, Meet Notion's Formula Property Part 1, if you haven't seen that yet, and explore the posts on Notion VIP as well as the cheat sheet. And once you get comfortable with that, you can move on to some more advanced use of functions, including those conditional functions with the if function.